This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Carl Tatz Design, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
You have to love it. End results have to be good, obviously. But I think the process of doing the art, the process of making it is probably the most important thing to me, because that experience and that process of being in the moment, it comes back to mindfulness of being in the present, is super, super important to your love of it and to the experience you're going to have in it and what's going to keep you interested in doing it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 complementer, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. If you are rocking a Mac Mini M1 in your studio, then you should definitely check out the new OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution. It's the perfect size to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or old Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Collin Dupuis, a Nashville and Detroit-based multi-Grammy nominated and two-time Grammy-winning mixer, producer, and engineer. Collin has been a guest on the podcast previously to talk about working with artists and projects including Lana Del Rey, St. Vincent, Dr. John, the Black Keys, and many other great records. And you can hear his backstory and more on that on episode 252, where he talked about starting out in Detroit, working with was it the Bass Brothers or the Bass Brothers?
They call themselves the Bass Brothers.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's funny. It could be bass.
I know.
Worked in hip-hop. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Working with the Bass Brothers, Jack White, Planet E Records, and Dan Auerbach, and moving to Nashville to make records where he is currently now. Currently, Collin is
actually
busy.
No.
Oh, no. Okay, all right, cool. We'll circle back.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
All right, groovy. I'm going to leave all this in, man. This is good.
Yeah, it's great.
We like the honest intro here.
Yeah.
Currently, Collin's busy working as a freelance mixer and engineer, recording and mixing songs and albums for artists, including Angel Olsen, Yves Tumor, Boy and Bear, Cherry Glazer, Lawrence Rothman, and many others. So please welcome Collin Dupuis to Recording Studio Rockstars. Collin, are you ready to rock yet again, man?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Dude, great to have you back, dude. You're fun to have on the podcast because you are you're so into what you do that if I dare not ask anything about anything before we're rolling, because you've already started telling me about a badass interface that you're using for your headphones. And then I forgot what else. Oh, quick keys for the screen turning off. So let's just start right off the bat with that fun stuff. What are you talking into now? So Rockstars.
Well, I'm talking into a Earthworks microphone, omnidirectional, because then I don't have to have it pointing any specific place. I can just point it at my face.
Yeah.
And it's going to sound. Yeah, from the side, just so I'm not blowing air into it.
Yep. That's a good trick.
I actually record vocals like this a lot. I think it's something people need to think about. You don't actually have to have the 47 pointing directly in front of someone's face to record them.
Nice. Well,
you can actually record a whole performance of it pointing from the side of their face, and it's going to sound great.
Yeah, and the omni means that as you move around, the mic doesn't sort of freak out the frequency response, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the other point, is that like I can move around a little bit and you're not going to hear a big variable in sound changes. So yeah.
So for this particular interview, Rockstars, we're just having like a Skype call that sounds like a crappy computer mic for me. So I don't get to hear the good Collin, but you get to hear the good Collin when we do the mix on the podcast. So
yep.
Hopefully this will go as planned. And okay, so what else? Then you grabbed this cool little box that you thought everybody should know about for your headphones.
Oh yeah, because we were going to get crosstalk between you and my microphone and my laptop. So I plugged in my shit audio, which is not spelled the way you think it is. It's spelled SCHITTE or something like that. And the model's called Fulla, FULLA. Husky Hoskolds, a friend, engineer friend out in LA, who, if you guys don't know who he is, you guys need to check him out, because he has a laundry list of ridiculous records that he's worked on. Yeah,
he's great. And he's been an awesome guest on the podcast as well.
Yeah, he's bonkers. Like, he's one of those persons you're like, okay, yeah. But he suggested this. He had posted something on social media about this interface, and I texted him. I was like, what's up with that? And he's like, it's really good. You should get it. It's $100. It's like a headphone DAC, portable headphone, has a actual analog volume knob. It has a couple function things where you can run like analog signals into it. It has an 1/8 inch output, so you can like run the output into a pair of speakers line level. It's unbalanced stuff, but I mean, what do you expect from a little small box? It's $100, but sonically the converters in are really good, and it's super low noise. So if you turn it up real loud, you're not getting self noise from it. It doesn't generate, and it can power any headphones that I've hooked up to it. I'm currently using like a pair of the Prestige Series Gradolabs RSR341s, which are not their cheaper version, but they sound good on it.
You know what's funny about those headphones is, because they have the big yellow foam ear pad, they actually look like the old ones that like from the 1970s that we would have in school. And the foam falls apart on your ear.
Yeah, well, these are actually aftermarket foam pads. Like the Grado ones don't look like this. I grabbed a pair of Fostex replacement ear cups from the Fostex headphones from B&H Photo. This isn't a sponsor.
I love that place.
Yeah. So like, maybe they'll give you something, but yeah, from this conversation, I don't know.
Have you been to the B&H Photo?
I've never been there.
Oh my God, dude.
Is it bonkers?
It's like Disney World for geeky tech stuff, you know, whether it's recording gear, but like all the video stuff. I just walked in and I was like, I want to be an iPhone video blogger. And they're like, here's 6 amazing options for like handheld, everything you can think of. It's really fun. And they're all experts. Yeah,
of course. I'm sure you to run a business that sells that kind of equipment, you have to be on point with what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, and then all the boxes and stuff are like running around over your heads on these tracks. It's like this elaborate.
It's like that. Yeah,
it's like run by elves or something.
Mechanical elves.
Mechanical elves. You know, Christmas gifts are going all around the world or something. But anyway, cool, man. We digress. Now, the other thing that you mentioned just before we got going, I guess we were talking about, I don't know what it was, cool quick keys or something.
Oh yeah, I just have hot corners. You know, Apple, the Mac OS has hot corner choices, and I have hot corners set up to go to a screensaver. But my screensaver is a blackout, where it literally just blacks the screen out. So while I'm working, if I want to do a quick, just like non-visually impaired listening, because you know I call it visually impaired because as soon as you're looking at something, your ears don't hear as much detail. Yeah. So I can flip that. Because I find that when I close my eyes, it's different sounding than it is with my eyes open. And I don't know if anyone else feels this way, that like closing your eyes changes it also. And maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want to try to visualize the images that I'm creating with the sound, but I don't have my eyes open to do it. So if I can remove the Pro Tools staring at me by just having a black screen, I can keep my eyes open, remove the screen from my vision, and just by flipping my mouse up to the right-hand side.
Yeah, I feel like closing your eyes is like having to do something. It's looking at nothing is like more meditative.
I actually have a plan for this, like with like I would like to eventually have like a black screen that goes down in front of my speakers and anything else that literally you can't see speakers. And it's just sound can travel right through it. And all you hear is the sound coming from this void, this black void, allowing you to completely visualize without any influence.
Yeah, that's what they do in theaters, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The screen that comes down and you can project on it.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. I like that. I do, the other thing that I've been messing with in the studio when I'm listening to stuff is I'm like, whatever happened to the iTunes visualizer, and it's like, how in the world does Spotify not have one of those? I know they're like, we're not going to do that. We want to show you ads,
It's social media stuff. Now it's similar to TikTok where like there's things I've noticed about Spotify, and I don't really use Spotify, and I don't know if they're a sponsor of yours or not.
No, they're not.
Dog on. Okay. I can dog on them a little bit then. Yeah, they're kind of ruining the music business, and they're changing music, and it's the social media aspect of it is, and it's just what it is. I'm an old man. Bah humbug, get off my lawn. I get it. But yeah, people need to pay for music. I mean, because otherwise you guys won't have music except for the big pop music being created by the multi-conglomerates, and that's it. That's all we're going to get.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, it's funny that you bring that up because, you had mentioned Husky Hoskolds, and I believe it was Husky who pushed me to actually start using Spotify for sharing all the music from the artist, just because it was at least, YouTube it was like the message was kind of like YouTube doesn't get anything to anybody. At least Spotify gets something from streaming to the artist or the label.
Oh, YouTube, but don't even get me started on that one. They're even worse than Spotify when it comes to paying out. I get it because they don't have to, because it's like, oh, someone uploaded the song. So it's not actually, we don't have to count that because that's a user upload. And it's just, it gets like, so.
Well, despite that, we do have an awesome Spotify playlist. For your work. So Rockstars, make sure to check that out because Collin has done a ton of cool sounding records. And Collin, if you had to sum up in a sentence, like what is the sound that you, I don't want to say like, what's your signature, but it's like, what's the sound that you live in that might describe your work and records? Do you have any way to do that?
Not in one sentence.
All right.
I can try to do it in a very short amount of time. My goal is just to give the sound of the thing the art that's being made, because I wouldn't really call modern record production performative, being that there's performances happening, but often there's non-realisms to it. So it's all I really consider record making a fantasy land world. I don't visualize it in this kind of like documentarian type of recording thing. I visualize sound in like this like movie theater like experience that is three-dimensional and doesn't really have it just isn't based in real reality, because you're taking someone on a journey, and that's my goal, is to take you on a journey, whatever that journey is, and help the music that is go on that journey. So if that journey is chaos and scariness and whatever, or some kind of dark mood or some happy mood, whatever that is, I want that visual experience to be there also. And I don't really think that I want to follow specific rules, because there is no rules to it. It's just, it has to feel right in the context of the music that was created and how that was created. There's no rules on how it was created. So
what if you had to, what if the mood you needed to create was a tailgate at a football game in middle America?
I would just play Huey Lewis in the News.
Huey Lewis in the News. Awesome. I love it.
I would just like put on Huey Lewis in the News. Like the song Sport. I mean, the album Sports. I mean, that's like,
put me in, coach.
Yeah. Like that's like
not Huey Lewis, but same
or John Cougar Mellencamp or something like that's like, that's middle America classic rock that is like, just exemplifies that cultural norm, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. That's what it is. And actually, I really like Huey Lewis and News and John Cougar Mellencamp for those reasons, because they're not trying to be left field or odd or weird. It's like, here's this thing. Like,
how about the Jay Giles band, man?
Same thing. We're really good at this thing. I mean, I grew up and I was a kid when MTV came on the air. I remember, you'd probably the same thing. You remember the first year it came on the air and just how that affected sound and music.
Yeah, but only when we would check into a hotel room and then you turn on the TV and you're like, oh my God, they have MTV.
Oh,
we never had it in our house.
We had it. My mom was ahead of the curve a little bit.
Nice.
I remember the Flock of Seagulls video. I loved that album. Like I had that album on vinyl. I still have the vinyl from when
Hungry Like the Wolf.
Duran Duran is by far one of the best bands from that era, without any question. Just
there's a lot of stuff that I'm hearing now that's starting to bring some of that back. And actually, one of the artists you work with, who I spent many years working with too, is Lawrence Rothman.
Yeah, he's a talented dude.
Yeah, and he was always a big fan of Depeche Mode. I mean, in fact, he introduced me to artists like that, New Order. And I feel like some of that stuff's really circling back now too.
It's great stuff. I grew up on this. That was I got into the New Order and all of that stuff. I was into Duran Duran when it was out, because I heard it a lot, because that was just what my brain focused on when I was, in first and second and third grade.
And that was Detroit area, or
no? That's when I grew up. That age, I was still living in Lansing, Michigan.
Okay, all right. Well, Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan. Yeah.
Okay, cool, man. Well, so let's see. Tell us a little bit about where you are now, because I thought you were in Nashville, but
no,
I was wrong.
No, I moved back to Detroit. My wife and I have been wanting to do that. We have a 3-year-old lovely daughter, Louisa, together. And we're isolated in Nashville. We're isolated from family. Like, we have no family. And so our daughter was having no experiences from seeing aunts and uncles and grandparents and all that stuff. And our family members, not only COVID exacerbated this whole scenario, they don't have the time or the funds to be like constantly coming and staying and whatnot, so it's like, let's move back. Catherine looked for a job. She got an excellent job. I have a cool job and I can do it anywhere because I mix mostly. So I don't need to be in Nashville, and most of my clients aren't from Nashville. So it was kind of like, yeah, let's move. Like, I'd go back to Detroit. We can buy a house for really good. We just closed on a house that's like ridiculous. A 1929s 2-door style bunk. I mean, just, hardwood floors, steam, heat, like all you see it and you're like, oh, the houses don't exist like that in Nashville.
Right.
Not for that price. Like,
yeah.
not for
I remember
the price.
Detroit. I mean, I remember seeing pictures of like downtown Detroit and these incredibly ornate buildings that were just, nothing. I mean, it's probably changing now, but
they're still there. A lot of them. I mean,
nice.
The biggest Masonic temple in the world is in Detroit, Michigan. The Masons had the biggest numbers of Masons. I don't know if you guys, I'm not talking about Illuminati. I'm just talking about the fact
we'll always talk about that. Why not?
Yeah, but the Masons had such a big footprint in Detroit at that time, the turn of the century, that all these buildings, all these houses, all this stuff, all the skill sets for building ornate architecture of that era, like that Gothic stuff that's in Detroit is, happened because of the fact there were so many Masons in Detroit.
So Detroit, of course, is Motor City. But before that, was it, Mason City? And is that part of why Motor City ended up there or something?
I don't know. I really don't know the history that well as far as why that might be the case.
Lidge, sorry.
That's it. Yeah, another podcast. But I would go out on limb to say that like Detroit was an early settlement of Michigan. I know that for a fact. It was one of the earliest like settlements of the Michigan area, period. So it's like the first place that trains probably came to in Michigan. The first place that like we're talking like the 1800s, like or even 1700s, whatever. Like,
back when real men and women were making real music.
Yeah. You mean with just acoustic instruments with no recording devices, and no one could hear it except for the people sitting there listening to it. But yeah,
the new piano has arrived. Sorry.
Detroit has an old history, and I would say the industrial moment in history is a big part of it, and the Masons are a big part of that. So without any question, I mean,
right on, man. Right on. Well, so let's see. Anything else you want to give a shout out to Detroit about, just like the music scene and like what's happening now?
Yeah, there's a bunch of cool stuff, and there's great bands like Portemeyer and like all kinds of cool stuff. And my band that I've been in for a long time, we just came out with a new record, Zuzer Berlin. Anyone want to check it out? We just came out with another record. It's out, and we're actually working. I just mixed 2 new songs. They're going to be singles we're going to put out in the next 2 weeks. And our goal is to just put stuff out because we need to, because we're getting older and it's enjoyable to us, and we want our music to get weirder and cooler, and it is. So here it is.
With so many game-changing iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all their plugins through iZotope's affordable subscription bundle, Music Production Suite Pro, for only $19.99 per month? Get your Rockstar extended 30-day free trial subscription now at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Not so with Samply. It's easy to add collaborators to a project so the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. Just upload your voice memo or mix and start collaborating. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to get together with my oldest friends, keep making music. Mm-hmm. And we've been trying to do that. It's got some struggles. In fact, we're scheduled to do that this weekend, and it may be falling apart, and I'll have to try again later. But
it's hard, man. It's hard to juggle all this stuff, to do art, especially when the art isn't actually paying your bills. It's there for just because you want to make that art. Yeah. It's harder. It gets harder and harder. And you just have to make, just like any type of long-term relationship or marriage, you go through the struggles and you got to put your time in and work it out and make it work.
What do you feel are some of the secrets to keeping a band together as we get older and continuing to do things that, keep everything moving forward?
I would say you have to love it. Keeping everyone on the same page of loving the process, not so much the results. I think that's the other thing about making records in general, I think is more important to me than the end results have to be good, obviously, but I think the process of doing the art, the process of making it, is probably the most important thing to me. And is because that experience and that process of being in the moment, which comes back to mindfulness of being in the present, is super, super important to your love of it, and to the experience you're going to have in it, and what's going to keep you interested in doing it. If you just are strictly a goal-oriented person, that eventually you'll just keep trying to get more goals, and then when you don't hit those goal marks, you get disappointed and you feel bad about yourself and you get depressed and all these things. But if you're in the moment just doing it, then you have no time to think about whether or not it gives you a dopamine rush or not from the goal. You're getting a dopamine rush by existing in it at the time. So that's just my take on life. Like, you got it right now. What's going on right now? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I feel very fortunate that we get to make music, and because I do love doing it. And I realize a lot of times the indicator for me that that's happening is that I'm, I don't know, last night I couldn't sleep. So I was up at 1:30 in the morning having a couple of apples for a snack. And then I whip out my laptop and listen to your playlist. And I'm like getting ready for the interview some more in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it and I was like, boy, if I didn't really like doing music and doing this shit, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be like doing taxes at, in the middle of
exactly.
Yeah. It's fun that we get to do this stuff, but, and getting together with friends and making records. I love playing a live show when we get to do it, but I don't really care about that representing some sort of success. I'd be totally happy to get together with people and hit the studio and just record and, release it or whatever. And just make music because it's fun. Well, so tell us about your studio up there, man. You've moved back.
I moved back.
I think you're in it now, right?
I'm actually in a room that is being lent to me by a friend of mine, Chris Colte. I don't know if you know who you should interview him. He's a super cool guy. He's done a bunch of great stuff. He has a studio called High Bias Recordings here in Detroit. I've known him for years. I helped him get the studio started years ago. And so I got a hold of him when I got back into town and was like, hey, I kind of need just a temporary room I can work out of and get mixes done. And I tend to work, now that I have a kid, I get up super early. And I made this choice too when we got back to Detroit to flip my script and be a morning person. And now today I woke up at 4:30 a.m. without an alarm, went to bed at 7:30. And I actually kind of like mornings a lot now, like getting up at 5 in the morning and having my coffee and my food and everything. And then by the time like my daughter wakes up to get her ready for school, I've done all the things I need to do. I can help out with that. My wife can take her to school and I can head out and get to the studio. And by the time I'm ready to head home, I've gotten, my 8 hours to 10 hours of work done. And I'm leaving the studio at 4:00.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, it is fun. And the more I get up super early to do stuff, when I do go down to the studio, there's this trippy kind of freshness of my brain when the sun's, still
not up yet. Here in Detroit, it's not up. It stays later.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up in the morning. So it's pitch dark here until
it's like a reverse night.
Yeah. It's the opposite of Nashville in that sense.
Nice. It's like you're doing a third shift at the Ford.
Yeah, exactly. Except for I go and sit in front of a pair of speakers and I work on mixes, which is, by the time 9:30 rolls around, I've already worked on 2 full songs and gotten like my head, just gotten that important focus work kind of done. And I can start a new song and start prepping up another song. Cause I cycle mix, I'm typically juggling 2 or 3 albums at once.
Yeah.
On most cases. So it's like I cycle through things so I don't get burned out on any one project sonically, because there are different headspaces they live in. So it allows me to kind of just jump around. And the morning has been really good for that. I'm very productive. So
what's a good a trick for you that helps you just keep track? If you're cycling and jumping around, that's great. But is there any part of your process that helps you make sure that you don't forget to check some of the boxes for each project?
Listen often. I've been using that Pure Mix up platform that Pure Mix provides. Everyone should check it out. Like if you have a Pure Mix account, you get a free pro version of this, but they have this free thing where it's a playlist and a plugin that goes into your DAW. And the plugin accesses these playlists from the internet. So you have to be connected to the internet, of course, but you can drag and drop updated files into the playlists and you share that with clients, and clients can listen back, and it streams at 16-bit 44.1 high quality audio, high enough quality, CD quality. It's way better than because the Dropbox app has this weird thing, like on the phone, it sounds like shit sometimes because of the buffering. Like if you're out on your phone driving around, the buffering will change the quality. And this Pure Mix is like a web-based interface only. It's not a separate app. And it's always high quality, no matter where you're streaming from cell phone or whatever. Like it's always CD quality. So it allows artists. The other cool thing is it gives the artists a they can make comments on the timeline like SoundCloud. So their mix notes tweaks can go on to the timeline in real time. You hit pause, put your note in, hit enter, it puts it on the timeline. Then you can bring those notes are automatically in your plugin in Pro Tools, and you can sync with Rewire MIDI it to go to the playhead of Pro Tools to go to the spot where the note is. So you click on the note in the plugin and it'll send Pro Tools to that spot.
Wow.
So you can it's super cool and it's super easy to use and it's great.
That's awesome. I've heard of, there's some other services out there that are doing some of similar things to that, but that's fascinating that the Pure Mix one has the plugin for Pro Tools like that.
Yeah.
And it's integrated.
Fab DuPont and those guys, the team of people, what they've come up with is pretty awesome. So I want to give them a plug and a shout on that because it's really game changing in the sense that I can listen to stuff, take a walk, put my headphones in, go walk around, listen to mix, make some notes on my phone, walk back into the studio and sit down and check those boxes, get them done. The other thing I've been doing to stay focused and not getting burned out is I've been using the Pomodoro method of mixing of work.
Yeah, tell us about it.
So it's like I set it for some you can do 20, 25, 30 minutes. I do 30 minutes in a 5-minute break, and there's a timer app. There's several of them you can get on in the App Store that the timer goes, and you can set it to projects. So like different projects, you can do 30 minutes. So if you're actually charging by the hour for something, it will automatically give you the time that you've spent on something. So you do 30 minutes. It sets the alarm off when it's time to stop. You have to stop. Don't keep working. And it gives you a 5-minute timer break. You hit start on the timer for your break. and you go do something. You step away, 5 minutes, go, make a cup of coffee, cup of tea, drink some water, look out the window, just whatever.
10 push-ups.
10 push-ups, whatever you want to do, crunches, whatever you want to do in that time. The timer goes back, you get back to work, and now you're back in the state of mind to work, and you're not rabbit holing. Because it's real easy with DAWs and software and looking and visually staring at a screen and getting in there to like rabbit hole on these finite little details that maybe aren't necessary, right? And it's a way of checking yourself and keeping you from going down that rabbit hole of fucking it up and making it worse sounding, right? And it's this timer that tells you to stop. Like, so everyone you can do it however you want, but the whole idea is that we only have so much attention span, and this methodology is to do it and to work in these short little snippets, really focused, and then stop and take breaks and come back and do that throughout the day, and not dig 4 hours into a mix and find it like the first mix you bounced like or printed or wherever you want to do, like an hour and a half or 2 hours ago, 4 hours ago, the first rough mix you printed sounds way better. And you're like,
yeah,
I spent all that time just like, I made it worse. So it keeps me from doing that. I spend less time on mixes, and my mixes are better now.
Yeah, that's great, man. It almost seems like it would be cool to put that timer into the Pure Mix plugin and have it actually automatically bounce at each break. It just bounces.
Fab, you listening? You listening, Fab? Like,
écoutez bien, Fab. Écoutez bien.
Make it better, Fab. I mean, yeah, something like that. Or even just
did I even just say that right? I don't even know if I just said an actual French word.
Probably. I'm the same thing. If I try speaking French, I sound ridiculous. So,
very
I
cool,
could say
man.
croissant.
I've done the Pomodoro thing before for some writing stuff, and I think I've done some of it in the studio. But I think it's a great tip because you're right. We just need to remember to get up out of the chair too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's physically healthier for you as well, which is really important if we're going to do records for a long time.
Yep. I take walks too. I try to do. I'm doing I just have an app on my phone that like takes how many steps. I'm trying to do 10,000 steps a day, but I'm not hard on myself if I can do it, but I try to get some walking in every day so that I'm not like my body isn't getting I mean, like your body will get so cramped up with sitting in a chair that you're like, my legs are terrible feeling. Like my back feels terrible. Like, what am I doing to myself? Because it's such a sedentary job. Like, it really is. Yeah, you scoot across the room to make an adjustment on a piece of outboard gear. Let's
give it a good name. Let's power scoot.
That's not exercise. I'm sorry.
I reached down and I picked up that cable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This good. I've decided to only play Gibson Les Pauls so that I can build more muscle
and have neck problems
and play my accordion.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, dude. Well, so like, what else is in your studio there? So you've got
my speakers.
Yeah, which I'm guessing are the Atomics.
They're not labeled Atomic, but Norm, rest in peace, from Atomic, designed them for me and built them for me. I wanted a custom 3-way. I'd heard his large reactor speakers when he first brought them around, Dan Auerbach's, the first rough model he built for Dan, which ended up being the one that like Vance Powell has now, and Jack White finally has a pair, and like, but the test model ended up in Dan's studio and the B room, and they sounded so good. The mid range was just so nice, and I was like, man, I can hear everything in the mid range. She's like, it's this mid driver, this mid dome. And I'm like, can you build me a pair of smaller speakers with this stuff in it? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. I'm like, so he did, and that's what I use.
This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring the PFM HD1000 master reference monitors, I was blown away. It was like listening to 3D holographic audio where I could reach out and touch the instruments with rock solid bass down to 20 hertz. It was awesome. And now I've got one of my very own at the Toy Box Studio in East Nashville. What's amazing is that the Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room too, or even your bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. I've heard the Atomic 610s, and I'm always blown away when I hear them somewhere. And yep. I think you mentioned that one of the things I should ask you is, didn't you recently build speakers for Jack or something like that? Yeah,
I built the reactors. Yeah, there was a pair of basically the speakers Advanced Power has, his big mains are Atomic Reactors MK1s, which are the first model Norm came up with of those large speakers that look like the 610, but they're bigger versions of them. And they're a three-way passive crossover with a dome mid and a tweeter and a mid bass on a passive side, and then an active crossover between the sub and the rest of that. So they're really simple not simple, it's a complex thing to do, but simple in the sense there's no DSP, so there's no latency to deal with and any of that. They go really loud. Like you can keep someone like Jack White happy with them. They go loud enough that someone who like wants to turn them up at 110 dB, they'll do 110 dB all day long with no distortion. Like wow. we measured it. Like you can go loud with them, and there's very low distortion even at really loud levels. So wow. So they're powered by Class D amps that are really great, like the Hypex Class Ds. They sound really great. Now I don't think Jack's using the Hypex, but Norm would typically want them to be on the Hypex because they're super low distortion. But they wanted it exactly what Vance had, which is like some Crown reference amps, which are great amps. You know, if you're going to get studio amps, the Crown reference series are great. Mm-hmm. So,
and if we go analog, do we have to worry about those settings drifting a little bit and getting realigned?
No. If you're talking like the passive crossovers are like literally inductors and capacitor filter networks that like are literally inside the speakers, just like any passive speaker. Like that won't shift in your lifetime. Like I'd be really surprised if those components lose their values in your lifetime. The tweeters and other stuff might wear out over time, but like the actual crossovers won't. The active crossover, which is just a crossover point between the sub and the rest of it, it's just that's a active analog crossover that sits at a fixed point. As long as no one touches the knobs on the electronic crossover, it's not going to change. Like no one's messing with it. So what I did is I went to Vance's, and Vance was really, really cool and let me reverse engineer his speakers, like take them apart, measure each component. I measured I basically just reverse engineer because there was no documentation on these components. And then I did a bunch of research and had to find some of these drivers. The mid-bass driver was a discontinued Italian driver for the mid-bass that just didn't exist. And I've located like 4 of them and then 4 cone replace kits to be able to sell to Jack as a package. Like here's the mid-bass drivers and here's some things that you have the ability to keep them running over your lifetime. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you're going to build stuff, you want to make sure that there's replacement parts and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I made sure that they got a package of like tweeters and mid-bass drivers and mid-domes and subwoofers that came with as part of the package. Like, here's this whole thing. So I reverse engineered the stuff, had a local guy in Nashville CNC mill all of the parts to build the boxes, and then had the really beautiful red Coca-Cola red paint auto finish done on them, so they're shiny and
nice.
Coca-Cola red. They look great. They sound great.
That's fun. What about installing them? Did you participate in that?
Oh yeah.
What are some of the things that go into just positioning the speakers for you like that?
Well, limitations of what's actually the room. So you have to deal with the room and what they have set up. So you have a mixing board and things like that. You just have to be like, all right, this is the best place we can place them based off of what you have in your room. Like if you're starting a studio from the ground up, you can plan all these things out and make room for everything. But when you're installing something that is in a pre-existing place, you kind of have to find the best place for it and just go at it and put them in the room. And I just use lasers and laser tape measures and lasers. So I use lasers to like laser levels to like toe the speakers in so they're pointing at the same exact laser dot point on a piece of paper. Like I spend my time with that stuff and getting them so that not only are they like towed in exactly the same, but also like distance. I use like lasers to do distance checking, and I also use like the Fuzz Measure app, which has that stuff built into it where you can look on Fuzz Measure and it'll tell you like the difference between two sources. So like both speakers are reaching the microphone and one is half a centimeter further away, 5 millimeters, then we got to scoot that one 5 millimeters closer, that kind of stuff. And I put the speakers up on stands with casters. I was like, you guys have to put casters on these sound anchors. Like I drilled the holes for them. We put the casters on. Like I actually had a local
casters so that they would move around.
So you could position them and then locking casters. So once you got them positioned, you could lock them down and be like, all right, don't fucking touch these. All right. Nice. Like, did anybody move these or touch these? You're going to have to call me and have me come in and make adjustments if you do.
Yeah.
So just leave them alone. But the whole point is it allows the setup of a large, heavy speaker like that on a stand, freestanding speaker to be able to be moved and towed in without it being a nightmare of it falling onto the Neve board that's sitting there and crushing.
Yeah, that's usually a
Neve
bummer.
board. Yeah. Like
when that happens.
Yeah,
every time I drop a 1-ton speaker onto my Neve
exactly.
board,
a 350-pound speaker literally like on your Neve console would destroy your Neve board.
Yeah,
like,
that's a good time for a Pomodoro break.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
right.
that's what goes into it. Like you're just spending your time. It takes a couple days really to get it. I mean, it took me really about a day's worth of time, but just you got to put your time in. And I think when you rush things like that, when people are like, oh, you got to rush, hurry, that whole thing in the studio world where we got to do it quick. It's like there's certain things in the studio world that should not be rushed. Mm-hmm. The building of your studio, the tuning and acoustic tuning of your studio, the setting up of your speakers, and the time spent to like really dial that stuff in so that you can get into it. Don't rush that stuff, everyone. Just get into it. Spend your time. Make time for it to find and solve those kind of problems, and then everything else you can rush all you want.
those are kind of like the benchmarks. It's like the things that make the benchmarks for what you're going to create. Make sure that you get those right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Your reference, your speakers, your room acoustics. If you can afford to spend the money, do it. I always tell people the more acoustic treatments you have in a room, probably better. Mm-hmm. Most people's control rooms are not good enough. They're not doing enough to make it good. I mean, unless you of course have the money to pay a real designer, and have someone build it out from ground up with a concept behind it. This from having Steve Durr come and help you.
No, actually, Carl Tatz.
Carl Tatz did that.
Okay. Redone my room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So much better than it ever
Crazy.
It's the
right?
same room.
Yeah, exactly. But it just comes down to taking the time and putting the money and effort into making it. I mean, I swear, I tell people, this is the only way you should do this. Like, is just do it right. Hire someone, pay them for their time, let them help you make it right.
All right. So very quickly, if you were going to if somebody came to you, somebody and said, just like, I want to start learning how to set up speakers. What's the simple start for people to just get practice and start learning how to do this stuff?
Get some basics, room acoustic knowledge under your belt. Like just read some articles on it. There's stuff on the internet. There's books on it. Get your head around how low frequency resonances work in a room and how the speaker boundary interference is involved. Like when you put a speaker close to a wall and at certain distances from the wall, it cancels certain frequencies at the distance you are standing from the wall. Also, there's a relationship to all these things and getting a sense of how those things play with each other. And that's kind of one of Carl Tatz's specialties, is knowing what to do and how to position the speakers in the room so that they're not interfering with the room in the wrong ways, and they're helping make the room, the what you're getting out of the low end of the speaker to be more even and not activating certain modes too much. And that's kind of that's the thing behind the phantom focusing that he does, which is to like play with like the reality of your room's acoustics and the reality of the size of your room, and to create a symmetrical relationship between the subwoofers and low frequency drivers and the rooms and the walls, front wall, side walls, all those things. Even speaker height plays into this. Like you can play with how the low end resonates against the floor by your speaker height if you have the ability to choose that stuff a little bit. So yeah.
Right. So speaker height would mean you'd need adjustable stands for different heights, different positions. And I mean, like, let's say, I mean, that all sounds a little bit rocket science for a beginner.
It's algebra.
Okay.
Like the basic room acoustics and things like that, it's really just algebraic equations. It's not calculus. Like if you want to get into like the serious acoustical physics where you want to like really study it and whatnot, then you start getting into the differential equations and you start getting really complex stuff. But like basic, these things we're talking about are just algebraic equations.
Right. So you start with the algebra, and then that gives you a starting position for your speakers. And then you learn a little bit about just moving them around and listening.
And listening is a big one too.
Yeah.
Analyzing was a test microphone and software, which is easily available to all of us now. Fuzz Measure is a great software. Room EQ Wizard's free for all those people who don't want to spend any money. It does similar things. It has a little bit more. You have to understand a little bit more. I think it's PC only. It might be actually Mac too, but it's free one, and that's a great one. It gives you the similar kind of stuff where you can look at frequency response charts. You can look at impulse responses. You can look at the waterfall plot of the room's decay, which is really what is telling you what's wrong with your room, is like how long is your room decaying at what frequencies and things like that. So, and that's really what causes the smearing in a room, is like the room decaying too long in certain frequencies. And then that room that's hanging around. And by the time it meets up with the newer stuff that's coming out of the speaker, that decayed low end is now causing that to either be added to or subtracted from, and causes the smearing in the low end. Why you can't hear tight, punchy low end in your room is because your room is going,
like a big bottle.
Yeah, it's going at 60 hertz or 80 hertz or whatever, or 100 hertz. Like, so like that's why it's just, the rule of thumb is if you can be in a bigger rectangular room, be in a bigger rectangular room. You're better off in general. Like just the bigger the room, the better. Period.
And rectangular meaning the long
non-cuboidal
is behind you.
Well, in general, that tends to be the better place, but sometimes it can be the width of the room can be the long point, just depending how big that depth is of, depending on sizes here. Like obviously you've seen control rooms where they're wider than they are deeper.
Yeah.
But I would probably guess that the back wall is also 10 more feet further away than the stretch cloth. There's often you see those studios where it looks like that. It's like, no, I bet you there's an area behind all that wall that's actually a bunch of acoustic treatments, and it's, you're not getting that. Because if your wall is too close behind you, it also is going to mess with you. It's going to cause a phase bounce of 180 degrees at audible frequencies. The same thing with your front wall. It's like it becomes just this nightmare situation you're putting yourself in. Well, all the people with small bedrooms, if you're in a cuboidal room, like measure if it's 12 feet by 12 feet, find a different room in your house. Start off with that if you can do that. Like obviously you have housemates, family, whatever. Try to be in a place where like you're in some kind of rectangle is probably going to be better than if you're in a cube. Like cubes are just like
they're not good for audio. Great for a band name though. Cuboidal is a great band name.
Yes, it is.
Start that up right now.
All you got to do is reference a bunch of science books and you can come up with band names left and right. Right?
So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so that your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more missed mix messages from the band. Phew! Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off for the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Look, I love using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the subscription bundle. For only $19.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. And just for you rock stars, get an extended 30-day free trial subscription at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscription. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Collin Dupuis, joining us from Detroit, not Nashville. And we're going to jump in and start talking about some of these awesome records you've been working on. You ready to jam, dude?
Yeah.
All right. So tell us about some of the projects you're excited about recently. I mean, I know you've been working with Yves Tumor, if I'm pronouncing that name right.
Yves.
Heaven to a Tortured Mind, which has got a great sound. It sounds like there's it's like a combination of live band stuff, but also loops and really taking advantage of that world.
Yeah. Like, I mean, all the people who are part of that creation process, or that team of people who are involved in that, Sean, Justin, that record was Justin Raisin, and there's, Yves Rothman also. Interesting enough, spelled the same way.
Right on.
Lawrence Rothman's brother is a big part of the production world of Yves Tumor. Justin Raisin was also very involved, and so it's like Yves, Justin. There's a couple other people. There's I think Anthony's one guy who's, I should have their names written down because I don't want to miss. So go look up the credits. Everyone's been giving proper credits. All the people who engineered the stuff. What was handed to me for mixing was really, really well thought out, and production and the direction was very spelled out. It wasn't like I was given this thing that said, hey, we don't know what to do. We don't really know where these songs are going. And the idea is like, no, and that's the vision. The vision is there. And as a mixer, that is like, you get to hit home runs. Like, I think I hit a home run mixing that record because I was allowed to mix that record in a way that fit the bill, which is the bill was already like, here's what we want it to do. And so now my job is to just take that and just push it further, but keep the thing that's there. And that's the goal. It's just like, what do you got here? What is going on? How can I keep what's there? And I always try to do that. And I mean, most projects it's spelled out, and some projects it's not spelled out, and it's really like you're producing the stuff too, because you're really changing things drastically. And to the point where I've been rejected for mixing stuff because like my mixes have been rejected because I changed things so much, because the rough mix has no direction. I have no idea what they want. And so I'm just doing whatever I want to it, which is, it's the risk of it. And, it doesn't work out. Fine. Cool. All right. See ya.
Well, I mean, as F. Reed Shippen said, if you're not getting fired for mixed projects, you're not doing the right thing.
You're not trying hard enough. Yeah. Yep. I completely agree with Reed on that. Like, if you're not getting fired from projects, you're not trying hard enough to do something, to make a statement. And you should, without any question nowadays, the way records are being produced and pop music is being heard by people, without any question, you have to bring the game up a level. You have to approach it from just anything goes, try anything. Don't be afraid about distortion. Don't be afraid about levels and things like that. Because if it gets to the point where it gets to mastering, if your mix is too loud, someone will say like, hey, can you back off some of the things you're doing to allow us room? That's rarely the case now. No one ever really says that. But if it does, someone will make some comment and you'll say, of course, but it will compromise the way this is gelling. It'll change. So I don't think that that's a consideration anymore, like for better or for worse. Of course, there's the lack of dynamic range in some stuff, but some music doesn't need dynamic range. I personally feel that some music, like Yves Tumor, for instance, should not be this dynamic classical recording type of mindset. It's this thing, this otherworld experience that you're being taken into, and its intensity is what's important, not clarity or like dynamic range.
Yeah,
like
yeah. It struck me as something where, when you start a song, you're just immediately in an environment of that song, and you just stay in that environment through the production. And I thought that was cool. It's like it's a real mood setter, which shout out to you, Yves and Lawrence. Give me a call sometime, guys.
Lawrence.
But that's cool. That's great to see those guys getting involved in all these cool projects. Lawrence also is somebody else that we'll talk about here in just a minute. So yeah, man. Well, very cool. So talk a little bit about some of the tools that you might have used to mix that record. What is, are you still integrating a whole lot of outboard gear? Are you leaning and using a lot of Pro Tools, for example? Is it a combination of all those things?
Strictly in the box, in Pro Tools. I have been in the box mixing in Pro Tools for a long time now. I'd say I really dove in headfirst into it in around 2015. 2014 is when I really started for any project that was hiring me that wasn't something that was being done when I was working for Dan Auerbach at that moment. Like if we were mixing something, of course it was being spread out across the Spectrasonics board that's in there because it sounds amazing and it's kind of like, all right, cool. Yeah. Why not? And anything I'm being hired for that I have a say in the process, then I just started doing in the box to challenge myself to be like, can I do this in the box? And everything since then, since around 2015, everything that I've mixed has been in the box. Everything. Guster, anything that has my name on it, credit for mixing, Boy and Bear, Guster, whatever it is, Yves Tumor, Angel Olsen, is Jeff, 2 or 3 Jeff the Brotherhood records I help co-produce and engineer and mix, like all were mixed in the box. Like everything is mixed in the box. Like,
well, that's really exciting because that always just, we love hearing stories like that because it sort of opens up the opportunity for all of us to have access to some of the tools that sometimes we think the tools are outside of our reach.
Well, you still got to spend money on all the plugins.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true. And use the right ones.
I'm not like, I'd use a few that did design stuff, but I mean, I will say that like, there's a couple that are really great, but I'm not, I'm always searching, I'm always demoing plugins, and it's kind of a problem. I have to stop trying to do that because I spend too much money on plugins, but there's so many cool, weird plugins being made now that are just so non-analog. Like they're just not trying to be analog devices. They're not trying to be anything like all the unfiltered audio stuff that's being put out by Plugin Alliance. All that unfiltered audio stuff is just completely cool as hell. Like left field effects processors that do really cool stuff, and you can really stretch the sound of things. Tape emulation plugins where I'm not trying to get it to sound like a tape machine. I'm trying to get it sound like something, and you can play with the wow and flutter aspects of these plugins and play with their phase alignment. Like the ATR 102 from UAD is amazing for actually making something sound really crazy because you can play with the biasing and under biasing and over biasing and play with it and get it to do things that it wasn't probably meant to do. If you were actually having a tape machine in your studio, you wouldn't calibrate it that way. But because it's a plugin, you can just go at it and not worry about whether or not you're wasting a piece of tape that's, for an experiment. Like,
yeah, right.
You can just try stuff and see what it does and get it to do weird stuff. And it's, there's so many cool things, spatial things. There's all these cool 3D spatial plugins now that are doing like ambisonic kind of stuff. I kind of copped some of what Chad Blake did, that one thing he did, that spreader thing he has in his that you can download from Mixers and Masters, or probably on the internet now. But like he has a template he put up, and it has some spatial things he's doing, and I copped some of those ideas and then found my own way of doing it with other plugins and trying stuff out, and just experimenting, trying to get these widening effects that aren't normal sounding,
right?
Right. Like that when you put something into it, it feels like you're in this like weird closet with it, like you're in a small closet and you can hear the space around you.
Well, I got a good one to give you a shout out for, Cherry Glazer.
Yeah, great
that
song.
One you did, and I noticed that when you're mixing that, along come these power snare fills and stuff. And I was in earbuds and it completely threw my head into different spaces. So I wonder if you're breaking out some of those spatial effects and spreading things on any of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, some of that was automation. Like those were like that mix. I definitely I was a little more heavy handed with that one. They were like, just go for some stuff. Like the panning of that snare drum and the different kind of spatial things that were chosen. Like those are choices I made. Because I felt it needed to go someplace. You know, it was just a snare, like, and it was just mono. And I was like, oh, that's okay. But what happens if it goes back and forth really fast? So I just, I don't know if it was pan automation or whatever it is. It's probably 2 tracks of just moving stuff around.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that. I mean, there's no rule. Try to make it work within the context of what it's trying to live in. That's the goal always with me, is just let it be what it needs to be. If it wants to be a super clean, open, clear recording, then help that along and don't mess that up if that's what it needs to be. But I'm also not, I don't think that I probably am known for doing that kind of stuff. So I rarely get projects that people come to me and go like, can you make it sound clean? Like that's, like clear and open. It's like, no, there's other people who are really good at that. Like you should hire one of those people.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things about mixing in the box that you found? Obviously, having that flexibility and that way to make it not sound analog is unique to mixing in the computer. Where were some challenges? Where were places where you're like, oh, I had to figure out how to do this because I used to be able to do it in the analog world, but when I went to Pro Tools, I've struggled at first. But here's how I've sorted that out.
Gain staging was the big one. Figuring out where the levels need to come together into the mix bus. Like getting it so that when things are coming together in the Pro Tools mix bus, that you're not up near the top of the limit. There's something happens sonically. It's either the math that's involved. It's probably the math that's involved in any kind of summing network. Like this is summing digitally. It's all ones and zeros, and when you start filling in all the possible bit depth of it up to the max, and you're like, everything has been so maxed out and you're feeding it into this point where like your peaks are hitting close to zero, something happens sonically where it's not as wide. It starts to get cramped sounding, even though and I could be wrong with this. This is probably just a psychological thing I'm experiencing. It could be strictly what I experience inside my head, but I find that if I I often am getting the stuff, and what I do, first thing I do is I take all of I take the mix, how it is, they give it to me. If they haven't printed it, I print one with how they have it, leaving it so I have a reference of where they're leaving off. But I try to make sure, really communicate clearly to the artists or producers, whoever, that you have to print a mix and put in the Pro Tools session the 24-bit version, not the MP3 that's sitting in some Dropbox folder, but like the 24-bit version of the song everyone's listening to, the version everyone is currently listening to. And this happens a lot where like the artist is listening to some version that I have never heard. This happens all the time. They're like, well, there's this thing that's not right. And I'm like, well, what are you listening to? Because especially if it gets to the point where they're really like not into the mix right away. And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like, I know my mix sounds better than the rough mix. And they send me this other thing and it's blown out and loud and it's crazy and it's way different balances. The frequencies are way different. Everything's different. And I'm like, why wasn't this sent? So I'd make it an important point to be like, now to really communicate with the artist directly. If it feels like the producer is not being very communicative, if you get like the slow response from the producer and stuff, I'm like, all right, or the manager's trying to be in between the conversation, I'm like, I need to have direct communication with the artist or I'm not doing the project. This needs to be known that this is how it starts out. We need to communicate. I need to be able to go to the artist and say like, here, I have an idea about this. What about this? Or they need to be able to come to me and say like, really digging this, but I'm not digging this, and know that my response is going to be like, cool, okay, let's figure this out. Instead of like their manager, time delay coming to me communicating back to manager not communicating it clearly, the artist not hearing it from me and not hearing what it is that I'm trying to. It's like, it just makes it so hard to get the job done.
Mixing is frustrating like that too. When you feel like your computer and the mix process itself doesn't have immediate feedback, it's that same shitty feeling, like when the computer chokes up.
Oh yeah,
and you're trying to go so slowly to make a change.
I went into this segue. So go back to the idea of like gain staging was a big part, and so I went down a rabbit hole, and I'll do that. You got to bring me back.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I'm just saying it's similar.
Yeah, gain staging it's a bottleneck. So gain staging, first thing I do is I turn down. Typically if their plugins and all the choices they have going on are really good, then I keep what they have going and I figure out how to integrate what they're doing into what I'm doing and to make it work. But if they send me something and it's just kind of like, you can tell it's haphazardly, they just were putting the Bomb Factory 1176 on everything because that's what it's what they have, and they're compressing things. They hear that you got to put compression on everything to get it to sound good. Then I go, whatever, and I just remove it all, and I look at the gain staging of the balance. So here's the balance. How hard is it hitting the mix bus? Oh, it's clipping the mix bus. Okay, and that's why they have their faders down at -20 on all the tracks, because there's too much gain from the actual audio. So then I just gain all the audio down a bunch till I can get the faders up at around 0, and my general balance can be like anywhere from -5 to +2 on the faders in Pro Tools. So all of my faders on my control surface are where they should be, where they have the most amount of finite control, right? Like if you're pushing a fader and automating something, you don't want it to be 5 dB steps for like a millimeter of travel. You want it to be, a tenth of a dB steps for a millimeter of travel, like, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So you said controller. So tell us what do you use and what do you find is helpful as far as interfacing with Pro Tools?
I think any group of faders. I mean, I'm kind of eyeballing if I'm going to switch to another. I'm using a D command, a vintage D command.
The big desk, like a pretty.
I have a 20. No, that would be the D control, which would be the icon, the big one. I'm using a 24 fader. I'm only using 8 fader pack right now, but the center of the D command, and you could do 24 faders in the D command, and then the D control was the bigger, deeper one that had 6 AUX knobs per channel. Like it's their big flagship one. That's the other one, but I have a Blueface D command. I keep going. It works great. It doesn't sound like anything. What does sound good is the actual monitor controller, the Xmon that comes with it. It sounds like nothing. It's actually, I've tested it. It's really low distortion. It's really quiet. It sounds great. Like I don't see how anyone, like, it doesn't sound like anything.
That's cool. Yeah. I remember looking at some of those and considering I thought the old, D command, D control stuff looks really cool. I love the fact that you've got the knobs for adjusting compression and EQ, which I don't know if those actually interface with modern plugins now or
they do.
Cool.
I use it every day. I'm using the most current version of Ultimate 2021.7 or whatever it is. It reads up, it shows up how it's supposed to. Most plugins, there obviously will be certain parameters of more complex plugins that doesn't map as easily, but in general, it maps very well to most plugins. I use DMG's Equilibrium as my just go-to digital EQ, like that gets on every track for shaping, just tone shaping, quick tone shaping that isn't creating a sound. Now, if I want to get into a sound of something, then I start slapping EQs, plugins, and things like that actually have a tonal thing to them, like UAD 1073s and things like that, or the soft tube stuff, the console one, which has some nice character to the way those plugins work and sound, so yeah, I use clean digital EQs for my starting point to see, like, is that all it needs? 'Cause sometimes that's all some things need, is just some high pass filtering and some EQing, some cutting, and maybe a little broadband boosting. And then it starts to sound really alive and good. Right. It doesn't need a lot. It doesn't need
like, it's already got the personality.
Yeah. Especially if something comes to me and it has a ton of personality already. It's like they recorded it through all this stuff and they went for it, like they did on the Yves Tumor record. And the same thing with Lawrence Rothman. What he sends to you is really well along. Like, like working with him on his current record he came out, like the what he sent me was really great. And I just had to figure out how to widen things a little bit and like almost kind of like mastering in a way in some ways. Cause like what I'm doing is sweetening up certain aspects and kind of just trying to push things a little bit further. And he ended up using some of his mixes because they just worked out better. Like what I did didn't work. Okay, cool. But some of the stuff were my mixes, and it was starting from where he was leaving off, and I kept everything he was doing. I maybe just changed some of the routing because I have certain routing things I do to get parallel processing to happen to give me some of the glue and things I want. So like, so I'll bring in maybe only some parts of my routing matrix from my template into something that's more complex and more well-defined like that. It's maybe just some of these things will be brought in, and it's not starting from scratch. It's like, okay, I only need to do this and this and this to it. I can tell right away that's all I need to do. It just needs to be, it may be a little bit more, a little more de-essing, a little more clarity things it need to do to pull certain things more front and move certain frequencies out of the way, which is just really EQing. Like just take equilibrium and cut like 3 dB at 2K on this one thing, and now the vocal sounds great. It's like,
nice.
Like that's the art of it, really, of mixing is making room for the things that are really important and pushing some of the things out of the way that are getting in the way of the really important elements, and finding out ways to do it. And there's no rules on how you do that. Right.
Yeah. And that's, so that album is Good Morning America, Lawrence Rothman.
Yep.
Cool. Right on.
Some really, really good songs on that record, man. He's a talented dude.
Yeah. Well, we worked together for a long time in some different band iterations, and it's cool. He's always been great at sort of being fearless about reinventing himself and reinventing the music and going for a new thing. Totally fearless.
Like, yeah, he has no fear of like just pushing things, like trying something out to see if it sticks. And like, how do you know if it's going to work unless you try? And I totally agree with that. Like, you gotta, and like I said, I try stuff. And he'd go, oh, I'm not really into that much of it, but I like this aspect of what you're doing. So
yeah, actually,
can you undo the de-essing you've done? Like some of the songs are like, you're de-essing too much. I want those there. Okay, cool. I'll undo the de-essing. Yeah. Like I like the way the vocals sound, but I love what you're doing with the keyboard. So let's do that. I love what you're doing with the drums. Let's leave the vocals how I had them. Cool. No problem. Easy.
Yeah. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt Force certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. Now, the possibilities of how you can use your Mac Mini are limited only to your imagination. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. One of the things I remember about working with Lawrence years ago was that he was one of the artists that I would work with that would come in and just go, that sucks. And I was like, I learned to appreciate that. I was like, oh, I
love that.
I was like, oh, I wish great. I don't have to waste any more time in that direction. Let's go in this other direction.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate when people can just be kind of brutally honest. I mean, I've been fired. The times I've been fired from mixing a song or an album is like, it's like, okay, well, why is it you like, if if you can say like, hey, it's just not working. Okay, cool. Whatever. That's fine. That's what it is. You know, like it's what it is. Yeah. I wasn't the right person for the song. I was doing too much, or I was doing the wrong too much, or we're not doing enough, but not enough of the right stuff. It's just what it is. Like you take your lumps and you know, whatever. You still got to get paid though. That's the thing is like,
that can be a challenge sometimes.
When someone's manager comes back and says, oh, I don't want to pay you as much. It's like, that's not how this works. Like you still pay for the mix. Like you decided not to like it, not me. Like, but
yeah. Well, you know, and it's one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed pivoting away from the world of managers and labels and working directly with independent artists, is because it's just straightforward conversations. It's a PayPal button. It's things like that everybody's really familiar with.
Yeah, but that's 80% of my how I make a living is from independent artists or small labels that don't have huge budgets. You know, like when I'm doing major label stuff or bigger label or stuff that has funding behind it, it does become more complex. But I always have a real clear communication right from the beginning that like I got to communicate with the artists. There has to be clear communication coming from. If the producer, I need to know whoever, right from the beginning, I need to know whoever is being involved in the decision-making of this mixing. I need to be able to communicate with all of them. I need to be able to hear from them. Or if not, there needs to be someone who's being really good at delegating the information so it's clear what it is that's being said from people. So I'm not confused. I'm getting mixed information from different, you know, the artist says this, the producer says this, and it's the opposite. It's like, well, have they communicated with each other yet on this? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
I used to
the artist
realize it's like a triangulation of communication, and that doesn't work.
It doesn't. So like I you know, long as like there's someone, a point person that can handle me coming back and going like, hey, this is confusing. Can you clear this up for me? As long as there's someone who can do that. You know, if it's not just the artist that I'm communicating with, if it's a bunch of people, then there needs to be someone who can communicate with those people and clear something up when I'm confused by what it is that they're trying to ask. When like one note and mixed note says do this, but another mixed note says do the opposite of that, and it's in the same group of notes, and it's like, wait, hold on.
Don't those mixed notes just cancel each other out like frequencies?
Yeah, it's like, so I don't do it, so you don't want me to do anything then.
It's like flipping phase on a mixed note, flipping polarity.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let me ask you a couple more questions about the Yves Tumor records, if you want.
I would love to. Yeah. That's some of my favorite stuff to mix. I've mixed in a long time. That stuff is bonkers. It's
fun. So Yves Tumor, Katrina, it's got awesome sounding drums on it. Wonder if you want to share a story about that track, and also just kind of creating that balance of both like chaos and noise in a creatively in a production versus like keeping the focus in the mix.
Yeah, that's a constant challenge. When you're going for something that has that much kind of this really kind of like chaotic like that, like where there's like a wall of noise and it's kind of, you want it to be overwhelming. You know, it's like the why like albums like Loveless by My Bloody Valentine are so amazing, because it's not because they're sonically perfect records, but because they're sonically imperfect records. And there's a ton of just mashing together of sounds. And, that was kind of when I heard the song Katrina, like that was right away. I understood that that's kind of what needed to be maintained. I couldn't soften up the song that much. That if I was to soften up that intensity in the mid range and the intensity of the sounds, if I was to try to polish it up and make it perfect, that I'd be doing a disservice to it, because that's not what the song is. It needs to be like, like crazy. Mm-hmm. So like, I find that works for me is to actually go the opposite direction of what my engineering brain wants to do, which is to try to clean up things. And I actually will push things further into the painful, crazy land that it is, like, and actually boost frequencies that might actually, because I find that maybe that's what it needs to do. You just need to sometimes, instead of being an engineer, you need to just approach it from this, like, I don't need to fix this. This is not broken. I need to accentuate what's going on in it. And so just to do that. And I think that may have been one of the songs where I may have used some of, hold on. Let me actually, me think. I may have used some of my modular synth world stuff.
Oh, cool, man.
Because
cool.
I tend to not use any outboard gear, but like sometimes I will use my that modular synth which for processing audio. So I have the Expert Sleepers ES3 and ES6, I think it is, where it's like 8-at IO, or you can hook up 8-at to it and it gets its clocking audio wise from 8-at and it'll run either at 44.1 or 48K. And so you can send audio out to your light pipe and it converts it to the modular synth level and then run it through stuff and then run it back in.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it kind of helps. It works really good.
So because modular synth level is just a lower voltage
it's
signal?
actually louder. It's way louder.
Oh, okay.
Like if you take the output of a modular synth and run it into the line input of a converter, it'll be clipping your converter so quickly.
Nice.
It's crazy how much more level it is. So and there's an impedance, quite a big impedance difference. I think like typical output impedance of some kind of analog device in a modular synth is around 1K, which is really high for output impedance. Like if you looked at the output impedance of a distressor is 50 ohms, or the output of your converter is 50 ohms, not a 1K ohm. And then the input impedance of devices is around 100K ohms. So it's a really high impedance relationship going on. It's not typical line level here. Nice. Yeah, so Katrina. So yeah, this is one of the songs where, yeah, that was one of the songs that I definitely was using the modular synth to kind of bend and twist stuff. I think I was using some of like the make noise devices. There's like their delay, the make noise echo, delay echo they have does this really cool, like where you can like reverse feedback it. The feedback knob has a negative feedback effect. And if you turn the delay speed up pretty high and start to do the negative feedback on itself, it starts to do this really crazy thing. Like this, and then it has a pitch modulation ability on it where you can like pitch down the delay a shit ton or pitch it up or whatever. And you can just take that pitch knob and turn it just a little bit sour or a little bit sharp and play with that feedback. And you can put something in a place that's completely a different place. Like it's just like the whole thing of guitar pedals and all the crazy things that guitar pedals, stomp boxes that exist now. You can do things. So I probably will find myself using those kind of devices more and more, but plugins have been pretty good, have kept me pretty happy. But there's those moments where I'm just like, man, I know it'll get me to this point I want to get at really quickly if I just do this right away.
Yeah. Well, and it's fun to like immediately get to that sound and be able to actually have a knob to turn and commit it. You're printing it back in like that.
Exactly.
So what's some of your method of getting out of Pro Tools over to Pedal World and back in again?
It'd be the same thing. I would use interfacing devices to allow proper line level to guitar level. So I really like I have a couple of those orange ones that are made by the orange effects send and return boxes that are made by the Canadian company that makes all the cool stuff. Like
let me see here.
The XTC.
Okay.
It's made, the orange XTC that's made by, I can't think of their name. This happens to me often.
It's all right. That's why we got, I'm trying to be like Joe Rogan here, and I got searchability while we're live on the podcast. So hang tight, rock stars.
Yeah, that box, it's the XTC. I have a couple of the tabletop ones allow you to run like
I searched XTC and up comes the band. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. It's the company that makes everything that's interesting, like all these studio toolboxes and reamp boxes and things like that.
Yeah. There's a lot of different choices out there. Little Labs has got some great stuff.
Little Labs is great stuff. Yeah.
Audio Simplified is one that I've got set up in the studio, which I like because it has. I keep giving them a shout out, probably because it's the one I got, but it's also got like the power. It's like got the power supplies for all the pedals. That's
it's built into it.
Yeah,
that's great. I gotta check that out. That's great.
Yeah.
So that's all. I just go for devices that allow me a simple, clean IO that matches impedances, so that like whatever I do, and it allows you some level control. As long as something has something where you can control the level to and from a little bit enough to get get your signal back in, because you're going to print it back in. There is something fun about printing things back in, and kind of playing with things. You just like put it in loop record and like let it do about 2 or 3 performances, and then comp something together of this feedback freak out performance. And that's kind of what I did on that Katrina song. Like that's like, you hear some of the, if there's some of the effects that are that.
Yeah.
The same thing with the drums. Like I would say I probably I often do this. I will pick an element of the drum set. If there's like, obviously there's always multi mics. I'll pick one of those elements and I will go bonkers with it. Take one element and I will just destroy it to try to figure if I can pull some of the room out. And often it's either the kick outside mic or it's the snare close mic. Sometimes the snare close mic, if you just take a duplicate of it and go bonkers with it, where it's like completely, you can actually get the kick drum to sound awesome of the bleed.
Yeah,
ends up being this crazy,
like
cool
Sanzap. Go Sanzap crazy with it.
Yeah, Sanzap crazy with whatever plugins. Like there's really no rule to what plugins you use. I mean, sometimes it's the Sound Toys little radiator is good for that. Sometimes it's the Devil Lock's good for that. Sometimes it's just taking any one of like the Native Instruments. There's like that VHS Native Instruments VHS that was part of their contact library that Lawrence Rothman, shout out to Lawrence, turned me on to that. It has like this V8. It's a free thing that someone created, some outside creator created for Contact. So you got to have Contact player installed, but it's this VHS processor, and it does a bunch of cool tape warbling things, but it also has a really interesting compression destruction things built into it. Sketch Cassette 2 by Aberrant DSP. That Sketch Cassette 2 is so cool sounding. You can really, with that compressor limiter that's built into that thing, turn that thing on and start pushing the input and turning the output down and playing with it. You can get that thing to fold in on itself in some interesting ways. Like, and then you take that and you blend it in, and it gives you this thing where the drums can now live in this spot that just you can't get any other way. Like, a compressor won't do this. Like, I think that 1170, you might be able to do it with 1176, but I tend to find problems with taking traditional compression devices and trying to do these same things versus just using something and distorting it, or the Satin plugin by UHE, taking that and pushing it into some weird realms and playing with the settings, the internal settings of it to try to find it, try to break it, basically get it to do things that it probably wasn't naturally meant to do.
Yeah.
Play with the head gap or an azimuth adjustment on that Satin plugin. You can play with that and it will shift. It'll start canceling out certain frequencies and boosting other ones, and it becomes really cool sounding. It's like, wow, listen to that. It's like, same thing with stereo imaging stuff. You can put something through that and play with that azimuth adjustment, and now the way it's placed in the stereo image becomes really crazy because it's literally filtering out certain things, boosting certain things, and it's not coherent left and right. It's doing it differently in different places left and right.
Yeah, that was one of the tricks that Graham Cochran actually did a video years ago that I saw, and I think he had learned it from Andrew Sheps or something, but it was just taking a pair of duplicate guitars, not the same guitar, but like if you doubled it left and right and it didn't sound wide enough, you just go and like boost one frequency on the left and cut the same one on the right. You just do this mix and match. And it sounds wider and it's cool. And that sounds like what you're describing right there too.
Yeah, I do actually do a lot of stuff like that with delays too. Like I'll play with delays and have like these really short delays that are like 2 milliseconds on the left, 5 milliseconds on the right, and then are filtered differently. So that what gets sent to them starts creating like kind of comb filtering, but in a way that it's not really resonating comb filtering, but it feels like it's a spatial widening thing. But it's sonically very different because the left and right are EQ'd very differently. And it just it feels like I said, a closet effect. Like you literally are standing close to someone and you have a couple different stereo mics in a small little space, and it makes it sound like they're in a small, tight vocal booth or a small, tight drum room or a guitar space, like where it makes guitars sound like they're in a really small booth that you have the mic further away. 2 feet away from the amp, but you're getting a lot of the space to it. It's an interesting effect.
Now, when you're going for unusual effects like that, how often do you find yourself exploring presets versus just creating something from the ground up? Is that even a question worth asking?
Yeah. I mean, I'll use presets sometimes. I mean, it really depends on it. Usually I'll probably explore the presets of a plugin that is a new plugin that usually is something might be a little more daunting, or just to get my senses of what it does. Like, what does this plugin do? Like the plugin Alliance, the unfiltered audio stuff. That's kind of how I started to discover how those things operated. Is I start playing with presets, find something, because these are very unusual processors. These aren't like, like the Spec Ops plugin that's made by Unfiltered Audio is a granular processor. It uses granular synthesis processing to do some really wacky things. So it's like, to get your head around how that is working, how windowing and FFT windowing affects how many grains are being sampled and things like that, it's probably good there's nothing wrong with using some presets to figure out what this thing actually does. And then it's the same thing as having an H3000 Eventide. You didn't plug that thing in and start creating your own chorus effects. You used the default one, and then you start playing with the internal settings. Once you found something that turned you on, then you go in and start tweaking the little things that are inside of it. It's the same concept. I approach complex processors like that in the same way. If I had a rack mount device that can be quite complex in what it's doing, I start with something that feels right, and then I may tweak it a little bit. Sometimes the preset's perfect, but
yeah. I mean, sometimes it takes a lot of work to even get it to the preset point. From which you might want to just make a few adjustments.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll give myself time to do that, and maybe I'll just say I'm going to dedicate. I'll set a timer and allot myself a little bit of time to just explore this, because I'm looking for something. I'm looking for something for this one keyboard or whatever. And if it don't have an instinctual reaction to it, like I know I need to put this widening delay thing and this and that, and I filter it this way, like in my head, I can, if I'm not instantly just going there and doing it, then it's like, okay, I need to search. So give myself some time to just play, find something, and
set the Pomodoro timer.
Yeah. And if it doesn't work out, and I only lost 20 minutes of my day looking for something, and I may have learned something in that process. I may go, oh, this plugin does this really cool thing, and remember that you can go back to it for some other thing. So yeah, giving yourself time to explore. I think the detriment, a thing I notice often, there's a conversation that happens a lot in the pro audio world. There'll be people who will say things like, and I'm not trying to get down on any other mixers or other engineers, but there's this mentality that I think that happens in recording world is like, the faster I can get this song mixed, the better. Right. I think that's dangerous to have that mentality going into a project. I think it's dangerous for art in general to go into a project to try to get it done as fast as possible. The least amount of effort is different. That's a different concept. The least amount of effort you have to put in means that you have more refined skills, and you know what direction you want to go and how to get there with less effort. But trying to make it happen in the shortest amount of time, to say I can knock 6 songs out in a day, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't call that a bragging point. I would call that you're just trying to make more money kind of thing, which is nothing wrong with making money. But some stuff needs time. Some records need you to put the time in to figure it out, And so some stuff I do, it happens quickly, like in 2 or 3 hours. I have a song mixed and it feels great and it's working. And some stuff, it'll take me 2 days to 3 days for a song, because it's me not really getting it, trying to figure it out, having a good amount of back and forth with the artist. Sometimes the artist has to recut some stuff because they have a vision for it, but there's things that aren't happening, that you can go back and say, like, hey, I'm noticing this, but it'd be cool if we could just do this, but I can't do this because the way this was recorded. We have to either accept what's there, or you could re-record this one thing and it'll help out a lot. Or these guitars need to be re-recorded because they're just weird sounding and there's nothing I can do to get them to sound right. in the way that you want them to sound, right? Like what you are leading yourself in this conversation, where you're leading this conversation with me, that you want it to sound this certain way, but it's not how it sounds at all. And it's not recorded that way. So
yeah. And it's tough to know when to make that call too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I have no problems discussing with people that's just, sometimes it's just not it's not done yet. Like it hasn't been cooked enough on the production side. You guys aren't ready for it, or we just have to accept that there's certain limitations to what has been recorded and we can't go further than where we're at with it. At least I can't. And if you don't think I'm the right person for it, well then, okay, let's finish this out. You can move on and find someone else who you think might be able to do a better job. It's hard to say. I mean, yeah, it's art. Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't have any fear of getting into something and it taking time. It's just, some stuff takes more time. And if I can hear a rough demo or see a Pro Tools session before I start, this is the other thing I've been really adamant about too, is like either doing a test mix. So I'm actually doing test mix now with most new projects instead of just taking whole new projects on full albums. I'm like, let's mix a song together and see if we can work. See if this works. Like if you and if you like, I can like you're, like you can see if you like the way I make stuff sound, the way I communicate, and I can see if I like the way you communicate, if you're willing to be clear with me, if you're willing to like accept changes as I make, like in the direction I'm going to push things in, if we're going to work together or not. And if we're not going to work together, if it's not going to work because our personalities or whatever, or my aesthetics or your aesthetics or whatever, then we only have to finish this one song. You still pay me. You still get something you can release if you want to. I'll work on it and get it to where it's a place where we're at least try to be happy. And then we just don't keep working. And it's simple. Yeah.
It's like writing songs. I mean, you would get together and try writing a song with somebody before you would choose to write an entire album together.
Absolutely. It's the same thing. So why would you, to me, it makes no sense. And I'm just a lot happier now working this way with people as I do a test mix, see if we can work. And it avoids the pitfalls that I've experienced in the past of like getting into a record with somebody and then realizing that, and I don't want to point any fingers, but just some people are hard to work with. I'm not going to call any names out, but there's just some people who are literally impossible to work with. Right. And you get into it with the process and you're doing something and it's not working. And it has more to do with their personality or their personality and your personality not being able to work.
Yeah, the wrong ingredients.
It's the two ingredients aren't mixing, and it's just like it's a battle and it's pain and it's not worth the time because it's taking so much time and really it's taking more mental space and energy than it needs to because it's just mixing. This is, it's like we're at the stage where you have figured the production out, hopefully, right? This isn't I call this window shopping mixing when people come to you and they go, well, we recorded the way it's recorded, but we've envisioned the mixes to be like this. And you're like, well, you didn't record that at all.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing like what you recorded. And no matter what kind of filtering and compression will not change that aspect of it. And so they come to you expecting the world and you can only give them what they've recorded, just improved upon in some way. So
I feel like that happens sometimes. I've felt that when I've done a mix and I've wished that the mastering was going to add that thing that maybe I didn't put in the mix in the first place.
But it has to be there in the production before you mixed it.
Right.
It's what I've learned is like, if it isn't that thing that they're looking for, it doesn't exist when they've handed it to you, then it's like, it's not going to be that thing you want it to be. It's just not. So that's why doing the test mix thing has really improved that in my relationship with artists and the projects I'm working on. And it's really given me, allowed me to pick out the red flags when it seems that a project it's just not doable because the idea that the person has is unachievable based off of what's been handed to you to work on. Because you're the production, or it's not done. Maybe they need to go back to the drawing board and just try some new things. Like they want it to be this certain way. It's like, well, what's your vision? The vision isn't there. You didn't hand me anything with any vision in it. And now I have to create the vision, but I don't know what your vision is because you're not communicating it. It's not clear. The production is not clear in what your vision is.
Yeah. The Toy Box Studio, aka Recording Studio Rockstar's headquarters, is proud to announce that it is now an official Phantom Focus mix room designed by Carl Tatz. Yay! The beautiful new control room includes Carl's acoustic lens room treatment with the PFM HD 1000 master reference monitors laser aligned for holographic stereo imaging and depth of field with accuracy from 20 hertz to over 20 kilohertz. I've never mixed on a speaker system this awesome before, and it feels great. I used to feel like I would commit to a mix, cross my fingers, and hope that it would translate to the real world. But now, when I dream up a sound that I want to create in the studio, I just turn the mix knobs and the Phantom Focus monitors tell me truthfully when I get it right. Amazing. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. Well, very cool. So let me jump to another record here. This one, Leo Bud Welch. The Angels
that was interesting.
In Heaven Done Sign My Name. Super cool blues record. Tell us a story about that.
Well, I didn't mix it, but I will say that I tracked it, and I would say that my tracking approach is like my mixing approach, where I commit. Like I'm really, really adamant about committing while tracking. So that was tracked at Dan Auerbach's studio, Dan producing it. I think Richard Swift was, I don't know if he was given credit as co-producer, but he was heavily involved in the production too. He played a lot of the stuff, and he was heavily there. He was there the whole time, heavily involved. So there's a lot of Richard Swift on the way things end up. And as a recording engineer, when you're working with people who have a very specific approach and distinct sound and whatnot, it's pretty easy to get where it needs to go because it's like those people are involved. That was cut live on the floor, bleed everywhere, an easy eye sound. There's like drums, Leo, Dan, forgot who's playing bass, just like whoever the musicians are who are listed on the album. Everything was cut live. There may have been some keyboard overdubs on top of things, but I think there was this goal of getting it as live as possible. So like everything you're hearing on that was like live on the floor at easy eye sound, tracked to Pro Tools, minimal miking, because that's always been their approach over there. It's always been their approach that I've always had. Like drum set, there might be 2 or 3 mics on a drum set. There's 1 microphone on a guitar amp. I just don't subscribe to that like 3 or 4 microphones on a guitar amp thing. Some people love it. Some people are really good at it, but it's just so hard to work at the speed that someone like Dan Auerbach likes to work at and dial a sound with 3 microphones on a guitar amp. You're not given the time. Like they're performing the song and you're recording it. And they walked in the door. You make sure the tracks are armed, the Pro Tools session's up, and you start getting sounds and you're recording while you're getting sounds. Yeah. And you probably, while you've been moving mics, this is probably the take they want to keep. And that's it. And you don't have time to sit there and go like, I have 3 mics on the guitar amp. I have the ribbon mic and I have a condenser mic and I have this dynamic mic and I'm blending them together and I'm playing with the phase. And it's like, no, you don't have time for that at all. You have like, come on, hurry. What's the next thing? We're doing overdubs. Now print and mints. Okay, that's the mix that's going on the album. Release. Go. Yeah. Like literally Yeah.
It's funny because you're talking about the speed of mixing, but in the recording stage, that is one of the places where the speed of engineering can really be the right move because you don't want the music to like the music train the take already left the station by the time you're ready to record it.
Yeah.
And get it right. You know?
Well, also I think it really is helpful to be not be precious, and even during mixing, not to be precious, to just try stuff. So during tracking, like just try stuff. Like you learn by making mistakes, and there's been times on records that are big budgets that I have like certain sounds just aren't happening. And so it's like, okay, I'll switch. And then it's just like, okay, that guitar sound doesn't sound as good as it should. Let's just recut it real quick. And that's usually fine, but I mean, when you're operating at the level in engineering for someone like Dan Auerbach or anyone else who's kind of operating on this kind of fast, like really high decision-making, fast decision-making world, you do have to have your skill sets down. But you got to keep those skills, keep the device chain and the process in which you're working lean and mean, right? Like it's not about like I mean, it's not about doing a bunch of stuff and having a bunch of gear plugged in and chain and having all. It's about going, okay, I have these couple devices. I have these mic preamps. These, I know that sound a certain way, and just going for it. And like just using the mics that are up in the room and not sitting there spending hours switching mics from the guitar amps. Like, oh, let's try another mic. Oh, let's try the 57 now. Let's try the Royer. Let's try the Coles. Like,
you do that long before the session.
No, yeah. I mean, well, really how it comes down with what all the stuff that I was involved in recording over at Dan's studio, it came from this refined process of us working a lot together, like day in, day out, being in the studio, making records, and that sound of that studio getting dialed in over a 5-year period.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, and nothing gets unplugged. Literally, I guarantee you right now, if you want it in the patch bay, a good portion of what was patched that whole time is still patched the same way.
Yeah.
Because why would you unpatch the sound of the studio? Why would you undo?
And I think you and maybe it was M. Allen Parker were talking about the setup there being one where like you could just, you just direct, it's the same channel or whatever, you just direct it over here or direct it over there.
Yeah.
So it's just like instant access to different sounds in the studio.
Yeah, I came up with that at that studio.
Yeah.
And it was based off of the fact that Norm Drews of Atomic Audio designed and rebuilt that Altec sidecar the tracking board there. It's a one-off Altec 9300. There doesn't exist. If there is another one in the world, no one's ever seen them before. There's Altec experts. When Norm had found that thing, there's all these online Altec experts who are historical experts of Altec equipment who are like, never seen one before. Like, and so Norm took this thing and gutted it and rebuilt it and put all these crazy tube line amps as the bus makeup amps. So there's 16 buses. You can only assign one bus at a time. You can't assign multi-buses. So it's like the mic preamp channel feeds a bus, and that bus, and it's all transformer coupled balanced too. The whole summing network and all the buses are all balanced transformer coupled scenarios, low impedance, like tube circuits. So like McCurdy AU300s, RCA tube line amps, Altec tube line amps, Altec solid state amps, some ADM modules used as bus makeup amps, and there's stereo pairs of them. So every two buses are groups of these stereo pairs of different tube line makeup amps that Norm put input padding and output padding on, and feedback gain adjustments for tubes and things like that. So you could like actually like push the mic preamp into the bus, turn the pad on the output down, drive the bus really hard, turn the gain up on that gain makeup amp for the bus, and get a tone out of it.
That's cool. So you could choose what kind of, just like creative scrunch on the sound you wanted from the different buses.
Yeah, right in the beginning while tracking. So like, and like most of the records that I tracked started that way. There was like the Dr. John, which was the Quad 8 record board that was there. And that was before the Spectrasonics board got installed. So we did a Dr. John record. We did quite a few records with that Quad 8 board. And then Dan found the Spectrasonics, the 20 input Spectrasonics board. That went in. It took me a little while to figure that one out, but that went in, and I figured out how that was supposed to be wired in, and to get ground loop problems rid of, and to get the noise floor down to specs. So it would meet the specifications of what Spectrasonics would consider. And then that Altec came along, and then that was pretty much a majority of a lot of the records, like the Ray LaMontagne record, the Lana Del Rey record, all that stuff that board was used to track it. Like the Leo Bud Welch, everything was gone through those. So it's Altec solid state discrete op amps, transformer in and out, basic 2-band Langevin style EQ on each channel, and then the bus amps to do all those crazy things. And then out of those bus amps, I had figured out like compression. So like there was always on the bass bus, the bus that was used for bass tracking, there was LA3A on there. And then on all the guitar buses that were typically used for guitar, those were routed out to these U33 tube compressors made by Otherworld Audio, which I don't even know if they exist anymore that as a company. And then there's like the vocal chain is probably still is the UA176 original UA-176 tube compressor, which is probably one of my favorite vocal tube compressors that ever existed. It still is one of my favorites. Like those things are amazing sounding. And that goes through, there's quite a few different things. And that was the vocal chain. I had quite a few different pieces of gear set up in that vocal chain that I could use for filtering and shaping. And so it's like, so sometimes you could do an overdub and you're like, all right, I'm going to use the vocal chain because I can route this microphone that's on 17 to mic input on 17. I can route that to the vocal chain and do an overdub and see what it sounds like. Right. So let's do this like drum breakbeat overdub through this one chain that's set up for vocals. So it's going to whack out and get crazy. So there you get these happy accidents by having this ability, this matrix of routing. And that's why I'm super adamant about, that's how I record now. When I record a studio, I have to go to a studio that has a mixing board that has buses. So I can take the busing of the board and sum things together. And it's the same thing, but it's like all the records that I did at Dan's studio, I'm summing things together too. So like when you get the multi-tracks inside of Pro Tools, the drums, sometimes there might be two mics on the kick drum, a front and back side, but they're summed together onto one track. Maybe the overhead mic has 2 or 3 mics going to it to create the sound of that mono overhead, right? And that's just what it needed to be at that time.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's a lot of fun. And again, that's one of the things that I think we sometimes forget in this world of Pro Tools is that, we think about like, a plugin can do what a piece of gear used to do. But the thing that a computer can't do is it can't give you that ability to, without latency and weirdness, sum and bring things together in unique combinations to record it in the moment with parallel stuff going on very easily.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And also I think it's important as an engineer for myself to keep myself interested in the process is to push those boundaries, is to try to, and not going for perfection, but for excitement, right?
Yeah.
Like what is exciting at the time? Like what were we doing? Like how are we getting this energy to pop out? And it's the same thing, the Leo Bud Welch record, there's a bunch of that. Like the sound of what you hear on that record, those rough mixes from that record sound really close to those final mixes. Like what was tracked, like if you open the Pro Tools session, it's going to sound with no plugins on, it's going to sound like what you hear.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to encourage the rock stars to even think about like, whatever your setup is with your interface where you maybe don't have a mixer, like don't be afraid to just even integrate a little like an old Mackie mixer or something like that. You may not get much routing, but you can do a little bit of bussing and summing and just having any kind of analog mixer where you can start blending cool sounds together. I feel like you discover what kind of new sound is in there that you can start using. And it's probably cooler than not using it.
I actually completely agree. And I encourage people to go and find sub mixers, sidecar mixers of any kind. Not about quality, not about name brand. Go buy something on Reverb or whatever. If it's like, especially if it's within your affordable range, buy it and try it out and see if it works for you. Maybe that thing allows you to capture some sound. Maybe, which I often do too. If I go to a studio, I have these rack mount Spectrasonics mixers, which, good luck finding any of them, but like those 1100s Spectrasonics, they're like, I'll take those and I will hook extra mics on those around a drum set, and those become a mono drum sound. And they'll be placed in places that are not usual drum miking places, like one that's kind of pointing sideways at the snare drum, but like 2 feet away, another one pointing sideways at the kick drum or someplace out a foot or half away from the drum set, and another one that's behind the drummer pointing at the kind of overhead, but like over the shoulder. And those 3 will get summed together into this thing onto a track. And that becomes kind of like, I find the right balance between those to become like just a general tone of the drum set outside of the traditional miking that's on the drum set.
Cool.
And some songs, that mono track is most of the drum sound, right?
Nice.
And I typically only use dynamic mics because I don't have to worry about phantom power with this box.
Right.
And it's great, It's
That's
just,
cool.
I suggest people to find, there's tons of different little small mixers that were made that were like this, like line level things made by, there's Bogan made a bunch of solid state and tube based things from the 50s and 60s and 70s, like just broadcast devices. Like, oh man, there's so many different. Tapco, like whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like just grab some devices cheaply, $100, $150 to some like multi-mic to mono mixer, rack mount box or whatever, and get it and play with it and start just trying to commit multiple sources together. Same thing with guitars. Like if you're tracking guitars, there's something really cool about having the expediency of switching which mic and which amp is being for an overdub. I having to walk out into the live room, or it's like you're feeding the same. So if you only own one compressor, say you're like, I have one compressor I really like, or one chain of things I like using, that output is fed through those compressors, but like you can put 4 different mics through it at any
right. Just
random
mute
time.
and unmute the one you want to use. And
yeah, exactly. Or turn the knob up and down. Yeah, exactly. Or even blend 2 mics, and maybe because of the phase cancellation, because they're totally not supposed to be doing that. You know, I guess maybe there's something that happens that cancels out things, and it's really crazy sounding, and it's cool, and it's the perfect.
And I guess if you're trying to figure out how do I incorporate this into my studio, I guess one option would be to just pick up some little mixers and then just put the ins and outs at the patch bay, if that's not too many patch points, so that you could just patch through it if you want.
Yeah.
Keep something set up, or like you said, just kind of commit some extra stuff through the mixer and have it around. And maybe you still got mics that go straight through a mic pre straight to Pro Tools.
Yeah.
But you've also
absolutely.
got this mixer option to blend in.
Yeah, the mixer option, like that's kind of a go-to thing for me, especially if I'm going into a studio where I don't have a studio that doesn't have a mixing board with a bunch of bussing, right? And I know that I think it's really important for me to commit sounds and do things together. Maybe, and sometimes this multi-mic thing is a good way of capturing room sounds, right? So you have different mics around the room that are being summed to mono, right?
Yeah.
And you have 2 different mixers doing that. So you have like 6 mics total, and they're being summed. This 3 and this 3 are being summed to 2 different mono sources, would now become a stereo room sound. And there's such a complex thing going on that if you find the right balance, if you're using your headphones and you're spending your time listening while the drummer's playing like song or whatever you're doing, you give yourself a little bit of time, or even take a boombox and put it in the room. Boombox shows my age, or some kind of playback device when no one's there. You're setting up in the morning, put it in the room and hit play, and then listen to each of those mics and how they might blend together in the room in stereo in your headphones. And like, just by playing with those mics, you might all of a sudden get this really cool, crazy, wide, roomy sound that's going to be really cool and interesting. And you've kind of preset that up before the drummer got there. And then you're like, all right, I'm going to track these 2 things. And it's like all these mics in the room, a couple are sitting on the floor, another one's over here pointing at the wall or whatever. And then those things are being committed together, and you'll never achieve that sound easily with having just a bunch of mics tracked on separate tracks, because something about them going through the analog circuit together and kind of maybe even being smashed a little bit into the mix bus of this device and then backing the output down, there's a thing that happens where these things start to gel together in a certain way. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to easily get it in Pro Tools, and you'll spend a bunch more time trying to suss out which one of those mics are going to work. And then you probably don't have enough and you probably don't have enough inputs. So say you have only 8 inputs and you're trying to get a cool drum sound. Well, then record your basic stuff, like get a good mono overhead, a good snare, and a good kick, and a good spot mic for your floor tom. And if your overhead, you can do like the Glenn Johns thing, where the 2 overheads are like kind of spot mics of the toms, snare and kick. That's 4 tracks. You can get a cool drum sound. And then you have room for these, multi-mic room sounds, play with stuff. Not saying like this is going to be the solution for every single record you do, but it's up to you as an engineer to spend time. I spent years doing this kind of stuff on my own time before I even met Dan Auerbach, before I even worked at studios in Detroit. When I first started cutting my teeth as just an assistant engineer, I had a shared studio space with Norm from Atomic Audio. We shared a studio space for years together. We made all kinds of weird, cool records together, and just experimental recordings. You just hang out all night and light up a doobie and fucking just play around with sound and try to create like a spatial thing in stereo recording. And you have to put your time in to like playing with microphones and how they relate to the room, and just get a sense of how things are happening, Yeah. And you learn from that, So experiment. Let yourself play. Experiment. Yep. Don't be gory in it all the time. Sometimes the goal is to just search.
Yeah, goals
Right.
aren't as much fun as playing anyway.
No.
This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Dude, we're just about out of time, but it's been awesome hanging with you again. Is there anything that you want to touch on before we roll out?
Yeah, I think another thing I wanted to point out that I think is important for tracking, and I want to touch upon it. It has to do a little bit to do with a philosophy of just capturing things in the moment and being willing to just do stuff, which is like vocal tracking. I think is really, I think vocal tracking is, not saying it's being done, there's some really great vocal tracking being done really well by people, but I also think there's a lot of vocal tracking that's being done just not right in some ways. And what I mean by that is like, there's so much emphasis being put on getting the mic really close to someone's mouth and getting this really proximity effect laden vocal performance. And then also the person is doing it after. They're not playing live with the band. If that's what you're doing, so it's hard to get a vocalist to get into the vibe of something because they're not like in the moment experiencing it. Also, they're just doing it over and over and over and over and over, trying to get a perfect take. And there's a place for that. There's some productions where that's what it needs to be. But I think that if you can get the person to sing live with the band as much as possible, or live with the music performance, even if that means everyone's sitting around with laptops and synthesizers, but they're cutting stuff down live, like, you know, like whatever you can do. Like a good example is like Lana Del Rey stuff I did with Dan Auerbach was done like that. There's one song on the songs that we cut. There's songs that we had nothing to do with, but the stuff that we did do, there might've been one song where it was already, her lead vocal might have already been recorded, and it's just because it was such a good take that she's like, I don't want to redo this. This is great. But all the rest of it, like West Coast, Brooklyn Baby, the very first song on the record, like most of the songs on that record were cut with her standing next to me in the control room with an SM58, singing, the speakers blaring, me controlling feedback, like giving her enough delay and reverb on her voice, and
Cool.
Speakers loud enough that she could vibe out to it, at the same time constantly dealing with like, it's about to feedback, she's standing right here, she's going, hey, can I get you to do this, can you do this, do that? And Dan, communicating with Dan, like I'm like running Pro Tools, running this thing, everyone's out in the live room, the band's cutting the song down live, she's singing it, and that's it. And she may have done a couple punches on it, some of those songs, but it was all right then in the moment. The vibe of what she was getting and what her feeling that she puts across in the songs was from her being able to be in the moment and we captured what ends up being on those songs.
That's cool, because that was one of my questions, was about Brooklyn Baby, and just pointing out that the vocals, they actually sound super close. They sound like what you just said people are trying to do too hard, you know, which is like way up close. There's almost like a gentle distortion on the sound. And then there's this incredible swelling vocal into the verb when the choruses come, this one line.
I was printing those live. Those are printed.
That's fucking genius.
She was riding off of that. So there's 2 or 3 plate reverbs there. And I had, I think it was using, you know, either Art or Ibanez or someone. I think Ibanez has a rack mount guitar delay. It's a Bucket Brigade analog delay. Now the price is going to go way the fuck up now. But like, they're not very expensive. They're not a big deal. You can do this with guitar pedals, whatever. It's just, So I had that. That was the pre-delay with some feedback, and it might have been like a pre-delay that's like dun 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 dun. It's a little bit slower like that, but it has a little bit of feedback, and that was feeding into the big echo plate, which is Echo Plate 1, which was from American Sound Studios from Memphis. It was one of the original first runoffs of the Echo Plate series solid state plates that were made by the company Echo Plate. And so this plate, when you set it to the full open, that thing has like a 15-second decay or something. It's crazy. I've never heard a plate like that. That's the only plate I've ever experienced that has that kind of sound. So like I take a send out of Pro Tools. She's singing in her mic. A send out of Pro Tools feeds into that pre-delay analog buffer delay. That goes into the plate. That's being printed back onto tape, back into Pro Tools. So like a couple of the close vocal delays are actually are printed. They're from rack mount, or I think I was using the one of the tape delays in the room as just one of the slaps, and then the pre-delay was an analog thing. And I'm also doing some pre-filtering to get rid of low end into the plate. So I think I was doing that with a plugin on the send, like the aux send in Pro Tools. I put like the EQ3 7 or whatever, the Pro Tools plugin, because it's DSP, it's low latency, and then just high pass filter like some of the low end before it feeds out into the output into the plate, printing all that stuff back. And so everything you hear on that song was like, there's two drummers playing live. They're playing right next to each other, where like one drum set is facing the other drummer, and they're bleeding into each other. I had two overhead mics set up and a couple close mics, and they just are playing off of each other. And the guitars and bass and everything was cut live, and she's singing.
Like the Grateful Dead, man.
Yeah, and it just like all the effects you hear that were printed live. They were from delays and echoes. There might have been a couple plug-in reverbs too happening in real time, but they were nothing very complex. And it's just the sound of that stuff is how it got printed. Literally, if you open up those Pro Tools sessions, there might be a little bit of plug-in EQing to shape things, but it wasn't like this drastic, like extreme thing needing to be done to get it to that point.
Well, that's cool, man. And I feel like our takeaway from this is just being reminded by you to go ahead and like create the stuff in the moment, commit to it, and make it happen. So I'm excited to start busting out my sidecar mixers. Just so you know, I did a big change in my studio, which maybe you already knew about or not, but
I saw some of the pictures. Yeah. I don't know what you've done.
The console, the MCI console has moved on. Now I didn't really use the busing much on it. So in a way, I wasn't really using it for that, but I'm excited now to start getting into a new chapter and like having some sidecar stuff, small stuff that just, get creative with it.
Yep. I encourage it. I absolutely encourage it. Like, I think that the more multi-mic mixing boards you have in a studio that you can kind of just go to and play around with and kind of see what it does and just find its magic point that it operates in I think it's important to do that.
Yeah.
To have these things and to just commit and to be like you said before, I said earlier, or what you just said, like be completely, not say fearless, but just don't be afraid of making a mistake.
Well,
even if you're in the room with someone like,
even if you use it.
Yeah, or even if you're in the studio with someone like Lana Del Rey, don't be afraid to fuck up. Like, you make a mistake, and we had to redo a guitar or two on some of the songs because the sound needed to be different, or can't actually, I think it was like, or maybe Kenny wanted to redo the baritone guitar part.
Oh, is that Kenny Vaughn?
Kenny Vaughn played
great.
So like Kenny Vaughn wanted to redo a certain thing. So like, I'm like, okay, now that he wants to redo it, I'm going to choose a different microphone to get more of the low end out of it, that kind of thing. But whatever,
Well, so let me take us to our closing question. And you've answered this before, but maybe you'll have a different take on it today, or maybe not. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You get to go back and find young Collin, maybe back up in Detroit where you are again now. And you say, listen, dude, I want to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself? Maybe it's related to the stuff we're talking about now, or mixing, or maybe it's something to do with, transitioning to making sure you've got a happy family while you keep making records for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I'd say, I think something that all of us have to learn to do, which is, I think it's something that you have to learn to do, which you have to learn to keep your ego in check. I think it's really important when you're young, it's important to have a little bit of an ego, because it's what drives you to try, right? Like, you don't want to be so passive that you're scared to take risks, right? Because risks are how we learn and grow, right? Like you take a risk to move to a new city or do whatever, or to just try to be an audio engineer professionally. Like that's a risk in itself because like there's no guarantee you're going to make any money at all, right? Like there's like everyone listening, you are not going to make any money doing this. The first moment you realize that's the case, you will have freed yourself up from the worries of trying to do so, because the money will just happen if you get good and you give a shit and you care about music and care about the people you work with. It will just work out.
Yeah,
but it will. So you have to take risks. You have to have a certain amount of ego to have the confidence to take risks and do the things you want to do. But I would say it's a good idea to learn to also become modest after you start to get some success and you things are working for you, to get some modesty and to look at yourself in the mirror and go like, why am I doing this still? Is it because of my ego needs this, or am I doing this because I truly love to do music? And I think it's really important. And I would tell my younger self, who had a much bigger attitude, I'm sure back then, to, use that attitude in the right way, but to not trample on anyone and anyone's egos, and to learn to like speak in the right way to the right people, and learning, how to delegate personalities. And it's something you learn on the job anyways, but I'm just saying, like, in hindsight, I probably like 15, 20 years ago, I probably rubbed some people wrong. It's just the way it is. I
definitely did.
Yeah. I was just who I was then. And it's hard to see yourself in the moment. Right. So it's good to try to give yourself a little bit of a check and like see what you're doing and look in the mirror and go like, am I being gracious with the people I'm working with? Like, like, am I listening to them? Am I truly listening to the process? Like what they really want, what they're really saying. And I'll admit, I'm still learning how to do that. As a 40-something-year-old adult man, I'm still on a daily basis having to learn how to listen to what's being said to me by whoever, artist, my wife, whatever, and figure it out. All right. Like you get better at it every day, hopefully.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, we are psyched to be able to listen to you today. So thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's been an absolute pleasure hanging with you again. I look forward to coming up to Detroit and seeing your jam there. And Rockstars, give us a shout out too, if you're about ready for Collin and I to do something, in a studio where you get to learn how to do all this cool stuff.
Yeah, we actually mentioned this before. I think I had brought this up to you on a conversation. I think it'd be good. I think there's some basic recording information into more complex recording videos that don't exist on YouTube. I think there's a lot of how-to videos from people who are just trying to get clicks on YouTube. I'm not trying to shout at any, but there's a certain group of engineer people selling their products or their know-how to get the clicks, to get money from, which is fine, but it seems like it's not really, there's not a lot of it touching base on the things that I think are the pitfalls of learning to record, and the pitfalls of recording at home too, like room acoustic problems, and like I have a bunch of ideas. So
cool.
I think I'd like to have Liz involved, because Liz has a platform that's established, and I don't need to go out and try to reinvent the wheel and establish a platform. I think it'd be good to do some kind of co-conspiratorial thing like that.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Rockstars, just drop in a comment if you're somewhere where there's a comment below this podcast. Give us a shout, or send an email to me, lidge@recordingstudiorockstars.com, or send it to Collin. So how can the Rockstars find you? Where would you like them to reach out to you? What if they're ready to make their next hit record with you?
I mean, if someone wants to reach out to me, if you have a question, I have a contact page. I have 2 contact forms on my webpage, collindupuis.com. One contact form is just to ask me a question. Like, hey, how'd you do this on this record? I'll try to answer it. I may not answer it quickly, but I'll try to answer it to my best of my knowledge of what it is you're asking. And I'll answer. I mean, if you guys flood me with a bunch of emails and it's like, and you ask me stuff like, how do I get into studios and make money? It's like, well, be there. That's all I have to say. Like, be there, be in the room, try to be in the room right now. Like, if you're not in a studio, environment, get into one. Like quit your job. If you're in your 20s and you have no, or your teens or whatever, and you have no responsibility in life, you have no children, you have nothing that you owe anybody, now is the time to make all the sacrifices. Like get out there and do it. Hustle, 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 as they would say here in Detroit. Like
Awesome.
hustle it.
Awesome,
All
dude. Well, thank you so much, man. Great to see you. Thanks very much for listening, Rockstars. Collin, thanks for joining us, dude.
It's been a pleasure, as always. Thank you.
All right, man. I look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Spectra 1964, Samply, Carl Tatz Design, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any individual plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of plugins. And sign up for your free account at samplyaudio.com and get 2 projects now. Or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months of subscription. Plus, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. Just scroll down. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.